We appreciate the fact that many of you are giving up your evening to join us this evening. My name is Joe Rohde. I'm the chairman of the Housing and Urban Development and Zoning Committee. We are fortunate to have a number of our colleagues who have joined us tonight. Sitting at the table up here are our committee members. Several of them may stroll in a few minutes still, so we'll be a little disruptive. But Alderwoman Davis is present. She's the Alderwoman from the 19th Ward. Alderman Bosley from the 3rd Ward is with us. Alderman Boyd from the 22nd. Our host alderman and the person who made arrangements for the facility tonight is the alderman from the 16th Ward, and the alderman from the 24th Ward, Alderman Ogilvie, is with us, not on the committee, but joining us, or aldermen from the 13th, alderwomen from the 13th and 14th Ward, Murphy and Howard. So they're quite a pair. They show up at things frequently together because they're neighbors, not because they like each other. We want to go ahead and actually we have the chairwoman of the TIF Commission? Chair member, okay. Of our TIF Commission is with us as well this evening. We have a number of other people that are here as well, but before I digress and go on forever about that, I just wanted to go ahead and make a few introductory remarks to kind of get us set the tone. Why don't you go ahead and flip the first page here. And this is what we're going to try to do tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about an introduction and kind of what we're trying to accomplish. Then I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Development, Otis Williams, and he's going to go through a fairly extensive presentation. Initially, it's going to be kind of an educational piece for a little bit to try to get everybody on the same page. And then he's going to go through some of the recommendations that the mayor's office and he have been working on to act as interim, kind of an interim solution for us. And why don't you flip the next slide and kind of tell you what we're trying to do here. And it all might make a little bit more sense then. First thing is why incentives? We use those a lot. A lot of people talk about them, and what the incentives are, at least my interpretation of them, is that when we create taxes are somewhat of an inefficient way of allocating the cost of providing services. So we have services that the city provides. We go ahead and have to pay for those services, and how do we go ahead and pay for them? Well, we come up with these kind of somewhat arbitrary ways. Some of sales taxes, property taxes, earnings taxes, and so forth. And a lot of times the taxes aren't necessarily the most efficient allocation of the cost. And today's society, particularly large taxpayers like large businesses, have gotten very sophisticated at figuring out how to kind of game the system. And they play one municipality off against another municipality, or one state against another state, are in today's international economy, one country against another country. So you're seeing things like corporate inversions, where corporations in the United States that have high tax brackets are actually domiciling in countries with low tax brackets. And you're seeing businesses in St. Louis City with a higher tax bracket deliberately locating in St. Louis County with a lower tax bracket. This particularly creates a lot of competition when you're on a border of a state. So, and unfortunately, Missouri, 2 of our large cities are on state borders, so we have the state of Missouri competing against Illinois or Kansas on the other side of the state. Thank you. I've just been corrected already. We do something a little out of the ordinary, and it throws me off my game. So the first thing we need to do is actually call the meeting to order. That was the alderman from the 22nd being very polite, not embarrassing me publicly in front of everyone, so he whispered in my ear. So, Madam Clerk, why don't you call the roll, please?
Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Flowers, Alderman Boyd,
Present.
Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Kotar, Alderman Ogilvie, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Oldenburg,
Here.
Chairman Rohde.
Present.
6 present, you have a quorum.
Okay. Now I'm going to make you go through all that again. No, I won't. We'll start where I left off. So so this idea of competing for this, and we need to be particularly clever in this competitive environment. Our city has a moral responsibility to take care of all of our residents, and St. Louis, unfortunately, has a disproportionate share of the region's poor, and we need to provide quality services for them as well. And as part of that, we need to be particularly clever in how we use our taxing system to go ahead and transfer, in essence, wealth from people who can have the resources so that we can provide services for all of our residents. Some areas, and these are actual, if we look at our region, we have some very wealthy communities in the suburbs. They don't need businesses located in them. They're predominantly residents of very high incomes, and therefore they're not necessarily contributing to taking care of all the region's residents who are in need. When situations like that get completely out of hand, we have municipalities that don't have enough revenue in them to sustain themselves, and they have other tactics, such as writing tickets, which has become a big issue in North County, as we've seen with a number of the municipalities up there who do not have enough of a taxing base to provide services for their residents, so they develop artificial means of raising taxes by writing tickets. And of course, that's created a number of problems, as I'm sure everyone here is aware of. So while we go ahead, to be clever about that, we really need to have a business a plan, an economic development plan we lack. And we are anxiously trying to develop that. It's very expensive. Our director will talk a little bit more about that. But what we really need in the interim, and the biggest challenge in local government, is probably building consensus. And what we need tonight, what we're trying to do, is to try to build some consensus. Right now, the way we are organized, we have 28 aldermen, and each alderman has their own perspective of what their economic development plan is for their ward, and each of them have a different view about how to use economic incentives. And that's creating a real difficult situation. As I became chairman about 2 years ago, part of my goal was to go ahead and develop some consensus around an economic development plan for the city. Now, we're looking to do this consensus on an interim basis. We don't have the plan now. We hope to have one in 12 to 18 months. It would be great if we had one now. We'd get to work on this right away. But when we go ahead and use these incentives, it becomes almost, developers start working on projects, and sometimes it's 12 months, a year, 2 years that they're working on the projects, and they have an expectation that a certain amount of incentives are going to be available for them. And if we make radical shifts in that without telegraphing that in advance, we run the risk of developers having worked a year or 2 years, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's some of the larger developments, they'll spend millions of dollars before they get the first shovel full of dirt moves. So what we want to do is try to provide some predictable way forward until we have this plan. If we can kind of coalesce around some sort of consensus, the idea would be is that it wouldn't result in a very contentious process of granting these incentives. When you create incentives, you're trying to create behavior by using your tax policy, and we see that in a lot of different ways at the local and at the state and national level. An example of that would be historic tax credit. It's a reflection of our values to preserve historic buildings. The state sets some guidelines, and the state legislature does not vote on every project that comes through that needs historic tax credits. As long as the project meets those guidelines, it gets historic tax credits. The same thing with home deductibility of your mortgage. The federal government feels that it's important for you to own a home, that people own a home, so they grant you certain restrictions the ability to deduct the interest on your home mortgage. And you get that without Congress voting to approve every home. So if our goal is to come up with some guidelines, and if we can agree on what those guidelines are, then we can go ahead and not get we can provide some clarity and predictability for developers, and we can go ahead and streamline this process. We'd like to go ahead, my goal in doing this resolution and having these hearings is to come up with that consensus so that we aren't individually looking and guessing. Folks, there is not a project that I've been involved in that everybody agrees on with regard to incentives. We're always going to probably disagree with some aspect of it, but we need to go ahead and have some clear guidelines to tell the development community what they are, so that with a high level of expectation, when they get to the point where they come to the city, they will have those available for them. So what we're hoping to accomplish tonight is create these interim guidelines, and with the idea that about a year from now, we will come back with a business plan, and we will have an economic development plan, and we'll have the opportunity then to refine these a little bit more. Now, we're all new at this, and it's very difficult. The process of developing consensus is very difficult. So this is the kind of our first effort at this, so be patient with us. We know a lot of you, if you took your time out, you probably feel very, very strongly about this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So we wanted to go ahead and strike the right balance between, coming up in the next few weeks with something concrete that we can deliver on an interim basis, and yet something that provides people the opportunity to kind of share their thoughts. So what we're doing tonight is probably going to be limiting your input. We're going to have our Director of Development give a little background. They're going to talk about some of the immediate things that they like to get done. We have some questionnaires that they'll kind of walk you through and asking your input on those immediate things. And that's going to be the beginning of the presentation. Then near the end, when we're completed that process, which is kind of our near-term goal, we're going to go ahead and have an opportunity for folks to kind of share their opinions about bigger picture things, what the future, whether it's community benefit agreements, the types of projects that we're going to provide incentives for, when we should provide incentives, why we should provide them. We're going to go ahead and do that, and depending on how many people sign up, we'll probably limit people to about 2-minute comments each. Now, we've given a lot of thought to this in the last few days. Bryant Robinson, who's up here, Bryant and I have worked together a number of times on charrettes and trying to develop consensus, in community meetings. Bryant's very good and thoughtful about that. Bryant is going to participate in all this. He will be taking all the information that you fill out, whether they're on the forms or comments that are made in the speaking session, the open mic session later on, and he'll be probably trying to summarize the best that he can the collection of ideas that we have come up with tonight. And we're going to have another meeting similar to this next Tuesday, and we'll show you on a slide where that is. And we'll do the same thing then. So we have another collection of ideas, and we'll try to assimilate all those, make them available on a website, along with tonight's presentation. That'll be on a website. And then at some point after that, our committee members will begin discussions internally, having had the opportunity to read the comments as well as hear them play in firsthand. And then we'll see if we can develop a consensus on how to, whether or not we should adopt the resolution that's before us or how we might change that. And that would then serve as our interim solution, with the idea that some of these other ideas would be perhaps discussed earlier. So with that, Brian has just given me the flag sign, so I'm going to go ahead. The rest of that's not as important, so we'll go ahead and get Otis up here right away. Here's our next steps. We had the first reading of the resolution on June 2nd. This is the June 8th meeting. We're going to have another one on June 13th. We're going to compile the feedback into a summary document. We will probably have some more committee hearings on this, but we like to kind of get all that compiled first. Now, one of the things that we're hoping to do is begin understanding, if we're having these incentives, are they actually doing their job? So we've been working for the last 6 months getting information and data organized in the city, and we have a couple hearings. The St. Louis Public Schools are going to present some performance measures that I've been working on with them. That'll be at a daytime meeting at City Hall on Wednesday, June 28th. And then a kind of quality of life, quality of housing, just the economic well-being of our residents. The Community Development Agency is starting to develop those performance measures. The idea would be is that at some point in the future, the HUDZ committee would develop an annual report that would begin monitoring these key factors, and that we would then coordinate or monitor those performance measures with relative to the role that our incentives are having on those. I hope I'm making myself clear. So that's what's coming up. At this point, I'd like to introduce our Executive Director for Development, Otis Williams. Otis?
Thank you. We appreciate all of you coming. Thanks. We appreciate all of you coming out. And so what I want to do tonight is to share some thoughts and ideas, get your feedback as well as we take a look at where we are with incentives. And so I know there's a lot of dialogue. We have a lot of people commenting about it. It seems to be a topic du jour, probably online. So I thought it would be helpful when Alderman Rhodey mentioned having a listening session or having a session where we could provide input, you provide us input on what you would think might be some of the changes that we might look at. So I'm going to ask Brian to hit that first slide for me. Okay. Yeah, no, hold on. Yeah, let's. I don't need to tell you about LCLDC. You know we are the economic development arm of the City of St. Louis. And by the way, when I finish this, I'll give you a link and you can see all of these slides. But for the interest of time, I'm going to go to the next one, which is what is redevelopment? And this is a focused investment in blighted and underutilized area, which is intended to increase the jobs, the economic activity, and the workforce diversity of the City of St. Louis. And so we do that by those things that are listed below there, which is essentially removing vacancy and blight, diversity, encourage diversity and equity. I'm not going to read it all to you, but you can see the kinds of things that we are focused on here and what essentially what we're shooting for. So go back, there you go, list of development incentive programs. We always talk about when we're trying to get projects done, we have a toolbox that we're working with. And these are some of the incentives that, these are the incentives that are in that toolbox. And the one that is of topic for this meeting is the two at top, which is the real estate tax abatement. There are different versions of that through Chapter 353, Chapter 100, Chapter 99. It is essentially tax abatement. So disregard the chapters, but just letting you know that sometimes they come in different forms. But tax increment financing, which seems to be a really important topic. But all these others here are things that we also use throughout trying to facilitate and get development here in the City of St. Louis. You may recognize some of those, but one of the newer ones here is one called Set the Pace St. Louis. It recently went online, and if you go to our website, you can get more detail about Set the Pace St. Louis. This is about clean energy and fostering the ability to make repairs through clean energy. So go to the next one, please. Okay, so there are a number of myths that are out there, and I don't have all of them, but I tried to capture some of those. The first one is that the city funds redevelopment projects from the general fund. And the fact is the city does not take any money out of the general fund to support these projects. And what happens is that particularly for TIF, it goes into a special allocation fund based on the economic activity that's generated on the projects that we're incentivizing. And so I wanted to comment on that one first. The second one is that the city provides funds to the developers up front. And so most often people are saying the city is paying for such and such project, and that's not so. What happens is that we don't provide any project financing. The project generates the funds for financing and the new revenues to the city. And I'm going to go through an example in just a moment to try and explain what I just said. So the third myth is developers are lining up to complete projects in the city, and that is not so. And so many of us work real hard to try and get developers to come to the city to consider doing projects to try and help us with eliminating the blight and helping us with getting the jobs here for the citizens of the city. The developers are attracted to areas of the city where they can expect a return on investment, and that's really the key for them. But the key, what we spend a lot of time doing is trying to attract them to other areas of the city where that is not necessarily the case. And so there's always a comment about the north and south, right? So we do not incentivize projects in the north and the south of St. Louis and South City and North City. And I think the key point here is that what we will do is incentivize projects that are brought to us and those that we can talk people into doing for us. Those are the projects that are incentivized. And I always like to say that if somebody brings us a project, particularly in North City or South City, we want to try and further the redevelopment in those areas. So I welcome the help and identifying those kinds of projects that we can help further along. So let me give you an example on tax abatement. So generally, most folk think when we say tax abatement that we are eliminating the tax, that the person is not going to pay any taxes. And so tax abatement is it freezes the property assessment at their current level for a set period. And so the example in the box on the bottom left here essentially shows that this is a $100,000 improvement to a single-family home. And so before, the first column there basically says no project, essentially do nothing. That means that through that 10-year period that essentially the city would collect $3,864. But you can see the yearly number there. But if the project is tax abated, then generally at year 5, if this is a 5-year tax abatement, then the city would begin to get the $1,419. And so essentially the $8,942. But this is a simple project. It's not one of the very large ones that we're talking about, but the same principle applies, essentially showing that with no project, essentially there are taxes that continue to flow to the city, but with the project, we stand to have a significant increase at year 5 or year 6 when that project, when the taxes are then not abated, and the citizen or the homeowner has to pay the full taxes for that. So you can imagine what this might be if we had a much larger project that we're looking at here. So go to the next one. Let's look at tax increment financing. And so in this case, the TIF, diverse future tax revenue, increases from a defined area or from a specific project. And so on the left side of this box, at the bottom here, we're talking about if there was no project, the property tax, in this case, see if I have a pointer. The property tax in this case is in this column. And so you see that the property tax is $708. And so over a 20-year period, if we do nothing, that property yields to the city $16,484. On this side, we've got the project with incentives. And so essentially, with incentive, we look at the property tax, the sales tax, and the earnings tax. And you can see with the incentive getting, being a part of that project, we're now looking at the increase in property tax, the increase in sales tax, and the earnings tax. And the total revenue that has been generated is almost $5 million. But we take in consideration the value of the incentive, and we subtract that from that, and essentially, this is net new revenue. Net new revenue to the city with this project is almost $2,335,000. And so I think the important point I want to point out is we do nothing, which is do not incentivize this project to happen, or we do something and we then take a look at what the benefit can be to the city. Yes.
In the incentive value column, why did you run it out in the 19th and 20th year? Why did you stop at 18?
In this case, maybe the TIF pays off, it's paid off, and so at that point, we start to get full value. Okay. Can you go back to the other slide just a moment? This is sort of graphically showing, this blue line here is basically the do-nothing scenario. This is with the TIF, and then all of a sudden we see the particular increase in the value and the revenue that is being generated to the city. Okay, next. So why does the city need these tools? And I've talked a little bit about this, but it's to create value and focus interest and to overcome construction costs relative to the rental rates. And this is in a comparison to the city of St. Louis with our surrounding neighbors, particularly Clayton and the Central Corridor going out toward Chesterfield. Those are the folks that are general competition for the most part. And then to combat the regional competition that we were just talking about. And I point out here that Clayton, you know, where we think that we would not necessarily need incentives, realized that they needed to work with Centene and provided $75 million in public incentives to that particular project. Okay, so if I take a look at the construction costs to the rental rates, and the reason that and some of you have heard me say this, that generally it costs the same to build throughout the region. So no matter whether you're building in St. Louis, or you're building in Clayton, you're building in Chesterfield, or you're building in Illinois. But if you're in this region, the construction cost is generally the same. But your rental rates are different. And so the issue is, what kind of rates can we garner here in the city of St. Louis? And will a developer take that risk based on his rate of return that he's trying to seek to get financing, whether he will get that done? And so in this case, the construction cost, you can see, is pretty level. You know, it fluctuates just a little. But if you go over to the rental rates, you can see in downtown St. Louis, which is where we garner the higher rates here in the city, you can see that essentially we're somewhere between 15 and 25 for the rental, the office rents. If you go to Clayton, they can get over $30, but you can show the average here, which is a little over 26, 27. And then in the Central West End, a little higher. I mean, about this area, a little less than 25. And then again in West County. But the situation that we have here is trying to compete with this average and this average to try and get the incentive, try and get development here in the city. And so most often the incentive will cover that delta. So if it costs in the city of St. Louis is, like I said, is about the same. But if the rental rate is in the 18 to 25, then the developer is going to be looking to try and cover that shortfall if we want him to build here in the city. And so most often we're looking for that developer to provide that service, that job, or that opportunity here for the citizens of the city. So what work has been done to date, and we know that we have some issues, and so we essentially had a study done by PFM, which is a consulting firm. They completed that incentive study back in 2015. And it's been widely quoted by almost everybody in this room, probably. And so that was a good thing. But that was a self-initiated look by the St. Louis Development Corporation with support from the Board of Aldermen to take a look at what we had been doing in the past, and essentially there were some recommendations that came from that. So the other thing that we did was to hire a full-time financial analyst, and some of you know John Ferry. He's the little guy standing in the back over there. But we also, through his help, have developed a financial model that we use for reviewing the projects. And so what we have done is to take in consideration a lot of variables, a lot of assumptions to make sure that we are not giving away, but that in fact we are in fact ensuring that we get net new revenue to the city. That was a comprehensive economic development strategy that was completed jointly with the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, looking at the region in Missouri, the city and county. We have been testing, if you will, all of those assumptions that we've been working on our model and trying to essentially modify that. But it's not just the financial model. It also includes a comprehensive look at the architecture and the urban design effect for various projects. And we do that for projects over $1 million. So one of the other recommendations was to develop a tracking database for incentives. And so we've been working with the comptroller and the assessor and also the budget officer to try and come up with a database that will be very visible to the public. And so what we hope in a year or two is to be able to have a database that you can query online and follow the impact of the incentive that we have provided. And one of the other reasons why we want to do that is that we would like to be able to meet the requirements under the government's accounting standards board that requires us to take a look at that and to be more open. So we're going to be able to meet that requirement as well. And I basically instituted this reform by sending a memo. This is based on discussions with the Alderman, but also with discussions with the comptroller and her staff and others. I developed some ideas and I sent it to the Board of Aldermen and to the mayor, and this is the result of it, the recommendations that we're going to be providing to you this evening. So these were the key recommendations that came out of it. I think I spoke to most of those, that we should do a database development, develop a financial model. We've done that, and we have been focusing on the finding funds to do a citywide plan. And so that is very key for us. We think that we can then essentially be able to focus specifically on various activities based on input from the citizens during that planning process. So those things that are in bold are things that we have in fact completed or in fact in process of doing from the recommendations. So we are implementing those key recommendations, unlike I think I saw a comment saying that nobody's doing anything about it. We are working very hard to try and do that. Sometimes you can be hampered a little bit by funds, but other than that, we're doing everything that we can. So I talked about the review, the co-architectural review. You can see the kind of things that are involved in that review. The urban design review, you can see those things that we're looking at to ensure that those things are included. So essentially our score is about 30 points for this area, 30 for this, and then 40 for the financial review. So you have to essentially meet the guidelines within all of this area. So comprehensive review, we generally have to follow a but-for test, where we calculate the developer's rate of return and compare it to the market rate. So if it does not meet that criteria or it does not meet our but-for criteria, we do not go forward with the project. We do a cost-benefit test, and you can see the things there where we estimate the gross new tax revenue expected annually for a 30-year period. Subtract out the revenue loss to incentives and revenue loss to substitution effect. We contrast the net revenue to the annual cost on a per acre basis to determine the city's return on investment, and provide an objective score for the project based on how the project's return to the city compares to the city's financial stability targets. And so we go through that before we then provide a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen. So these are things that we have instituted within the last year and a half. So we spoke to the citywide plan. I indicated it's very important. We'll be moving ahead, but one of the things we have to do is to get the funding, and so we are trying to coordinate with various entities to get the funds that will be required to do that citywide plan. We know that that is important. We know that we need to have some goals and milestones out there that we need to be approaching, and so we will be doing that. So let's get to the interim policy guidelines. And so the ground rules here, essentially, I think we've passed out little sheets to you that essentially has a summary of what we think those guidelines will be, the interim policy. We want your feedback on those items, so just please mark your level of agreement or disagreement with those various recommendations, and add comments to it, to the handout, and please make sure we get your form back for our record.
Make sure that the public record is the best public record is writing on here.
Yes, the best public record is really for you to write on the paper and give it to us. You know, coming up to speak, we can hear you, but if you have some comments that you would like for us to specifically address, then please write on the form. Goes Maxine. So this is a quick list of what those interim guidelines are, and I'm going to quickly go through each one of those, sort of quickly expand. So under the comprehensive project review, any project with development costs over $1 million, if it's tax abatement, or any TIF, will be subject to a comprehensive project review. And I mentioned taking into consideration the architecture and the urban design and the financial considerations of the project. We will require applicants to schedule pre-application meetings that we will go over and be held for a minimum of 15 days ahead of applying for the incentive, and provide full application and all materials necessary to complete the review in a minimum of 30 days. And so what we hope to do is to eliminate what I call the last minute request for a project. So the second.
Can I just say something? So just you have the forms handed out, so just feel free to, during this time, we can give you like 2 minutes or a minute and a half or 2 minutes and give us your contents now. If you don't want to do that and you'd rather take these home, just take them home and you can mail them back to us if that's okay. So,
and we'll give you an address at the end here.
So what would be helpful is if you say comprehensive project review and if you want us to respond, what's different from that than what you do now, so that people know the difference between, is this a new proposal, or what's different from what you do now compared to what these proposals are?
Okay, so that's a good question. So almost 2 years ago, we were not doing very detailed financial analysis. So we started doing the financial analysis. So that has been ongoing now for the last 18 months. We are adding we'll be adding to for the committee's consideration the architecture and urban design component to it. Okay, so number 2, no new general fund appropriations backing are the bottom half contributions, and what I mean by that is that sometimes developers will ask for a portion, generally on a TIF, there's 100% of the property taxes, and we share, there is then the economic activity taxes. So 50% of the economic activity taxes goes to the developer, and 50% of that tax goes to the city. And so, yes.
Can you clarify a little bit more about when you talk about taxes being applied to the developer's project? Because I don't think it's clear to the general public that there wasn't anything there before.
Can you go back to that one slide on the tip? Okay, so on tip, so the fact is that at the beginning, in this case, we talked this just property tax. There could be a building here, but sometimes it's a vacant lot, whatever. Okay, so a vacant lot or a building, that property is currently paying taxes, and so when there is a project, there is a request for incentives. If the incentive is approved, then this is essentially what happens. The property taxes increase, and they begin to pay at this rate as opposed to this rate. The sales taxes that are collected are at this number. This is in the first year. The earnings tax, which potentially if it's an office complex Or if it is a retail complex, then this is the amount of earnings tax, 29,000, almost 30,000 that year. So the total revenue that's coming in for this project is 213,000 as opposed to, in this example, $708. So that is, but if you go all the way across, so what we have here is the total revenue is this, but we then take into consideration the value of the incentive, and we subtract that from this number, and we then show you what the net new revenue is to the city. So this is what actually goes to the general fund, or stays in the city.
So then explain what you mean by appropriation of backing the bottom half contributions.
Okay.
Because that's the number 2.
Okay, so let me go back to the explanation of the pot that is made up of the tip. So there is 100% for the property tax, and then there is the economic activity tax. The top half, we call, that top 50% actually goes to the developer. Right? I'm talking. Okay, the bottom half would go to the city. Occasionally, you have a project that will come in and say, I want my top half, that top 50%, but I may want 10% or 25%. I want, in this case, let's say they want 50% of the bottom half, then they would be at 75% of the each, and only 25% of that would be going to the city. Does that make it clear? Okay, so, all right, so, but we very seldom have that. Very seldom.
So
It's my top half of what?
yes.
The top half of the economic, okay, again, there are 2 stacks on the tip. As we were showing on that chart, there is a property tax, that's one half, okay? And then that's one component of it. Then the second component is the economic activity taxes, okay? Economic activity tax. And, yeah, so.
Comprised of sales and earnings tax.
Yeah, these are all things that are new. They didn't exist before. They only exist now because we have a project that is performing. They only exist now because we have a project that is performing. And so, in the case that we are talking about here, this actually sort of describes what's happening with the developer. This is the top half, if you will. And this is the bottom half. So essentially, if you have the economic activity taxes, just think of 100. So 50 of that is going to go, if we have $100, $50 is going to go to the developer. $50 is going to go to the city. If we are talking about it, then the developer getting some portion of the bottom half, then he may get $60 and we only get 40.
So that money helps pay off his loan, basically, and the risk he's taken.
Right.
We're really not, I mean, when you say it goes to him, it's like he's putting it in his pocket, and that's, it goes to pay off the risk he took.
Exactly. Alderman Hart made a good point. This is to pay for proven expenses that the developer has shown us that we agree is an expense that needs to be paid.
Or, on the flip side, it delays the ability for the city, prolongs with the longer economic value that we get to free food. So it goes to the developer to repay, but it also delays.
And the only time, yeah, very good point, but probably the only time, we have done 130 tips thereabouts, and I would dare say we may have done, where we've done the bottom half and inclusion, maybe 6 or 7 out of the 130. And so it's probably one of those where it was a very needy project that needed to happen, and this was the only way that it was going to happen. Okay. So are we okay with number 2 now? Okay, so if we go down to number 3, no new hotel sales tax. That seems to be a big debate that we have. There are two hotel taxes. One will continue to go into the mix for distribution, but then there's one that's above that, that essentially will not be. That's the one that the comptroller has always been very concerned about, and so we have agreed with the comptroller that we will, in the interim, will not do that. That's what we recommend. Yes, sir.
If that doesn't pass, will that reduce the price of the hotel room for customers?
No, the customer is gonna pay, no matter what. What happens is the tax that is collected is then what we're talking about, how is it distributed? Okay, instead of, that portion that was designated, to come to the city, we may have, in the past, may have made a deal for a portion of that hotel tax to go to the developer for a portion of the project.
To the TIF project?
Yes, to the TIF project.
Otis,
Yes, sir.
maybe worth pointing out why that's often done under state law, how a TIF can't capture hotel taxes.
All right, so, and I get my percentages. John, maybe it's better to have you come because you go through the numbers. Explain the hotel tax piece for us real quick, clear, so I don't confuse anybody.
So what we're talking about here is whenever you purchase a hotel room, there's your normal sales tax, the sales tax rate that you would pay on a hotel room, or if you were buying a bar or soap from, you know, somewhere else, anywhere, any store, right? That's the basic sales tax. Then you've got your additional hotel sales tax that goes to the CVC and so on and so forth. This, neither one of those.
That's
CVC, you gotta.
It's a convention, you gotta mention.
Oh,
Convention.
convention visitors.
Yeah.
Yeah, which goes to pay for tourism-related things. So under TIF law, neither one of those are captured by the TIF. So the portion that would go to the CVC does not get captured by the TIF, and the portion that would normally go to the city and other taxing bodies does not get captured by the TIF either. So, and we have no ability to give the CVC portion under any circumstance. We never could, never will. It's not legal. But what we have done is because it's not captured by the TIF, we've given that portion that goes to the city back to the developer through what's called a sales tax rebate. So we collect it and pay it back. So what we're saying now is that we're not going to do that. And I just add the reason we're not doing that is because of what we call the substitution effect or cannibalization. So we see that there's quite a number of new hotels, and we think that there's a high probability that those new hotels are taking rooms away from our existing hotels, which is affecting the city's bottom line. So, you know.
Good. I knew you would do a better job than you done. So number 4. Okay, no new sales tax generated by Proposition 1 will be captured by TIF, and so city. This is one of the things where we are going to be encouraging the city not to allow that to occur. So this is the part 1 that was passed. So then next under that will be the no new tax increases will be captured by TIF, and that one is all by state statute. August 28th, 2014, essentially. Yes.
Number 5, you say no new tax bill will be captured by TIF. There's a typo in here, but is it August 28, 2017 or 16, or because you have
No,
2014?
it's the date of the law.
So date of the law. Okay.
Yeah, that's the date of the law that essentially, I said the date of the law. There was a time period that was specified as the law that essentially said that no new taxes will be captured.
That's without the consent of the entity.
So without, because we have been, we could do that, but this is what we're recommending, that we do not do that.
You recommend that we
I'm sorry, that,
strongly disagree with this, or?
in this case, I think you would agree with this.
Oh, I would agree with this, okay.
Okay, you will agree with this, in this case, you will agree with this if you don't want us to collect those kind of taxes. We'll take it, thank you. All right, so number 6, sales and earnings taxes to be returned to the city's general revenue fund. So in this case, what we're talking about, generally, it will be 100%. We may be looking at taking a portion of that, and from that, particularly as we look at substitution effect throughout the area. So in this case, just I can give you an example. So if we were going to be given in the special allocation fund $100, we may choose to say that we are only going to give you $90, and we'll take $10 of that and put it back into the city. Or we may take $25 and put it back to give it back to the citizens. So we're going to look at what the impact of the evaluation is for substitution effect and determine. So that's why we don't have a set number. We're just going to take a look at each of the projects individually and determine what needs to be fair to the city as we look at this. Okay. Yes.
I'm just asking a silly question. So is this what I've been asking for on a cash flow recapture kind of simulation where we're getting a portion back?
Well, we have
Or is this
always
negotiation?
had the ability to do clawbacks, and we do clawbacks already. But this is another way to do what you have been asking. Okay. All right. So number 7, similar concept with property taxes to return to the cities. I'm sorry, to the taxing district. So one was to the city's general fund. The next one here is property taxes to the tax division, and we will work on based on the case by case on projects to determine what that number will be. We are looking to encourage the community improvement district or the transportation development district to reduce the amount of the TIF. In this case, what happens is that those fees are generated by the customers or by the users for the most part, and that will reduce the amount that is provided I'll take it away if you will from the city.
Bruce,
Yes.
why the limitation on that to public improvements and not just to trying to help pay off the TIF quicker, which would eventually gain the city more money?
I guess we were looking to try and better determine what was being used for, but I'd be happy if you would write down the rationale for why you think it should be the other way. Okay, number 9 is TIF assistance to be guided by the market value analysis. And so I know I'm bringing up a term and a thought that is totally foreign. This is like speaking French, but okay, so I've got my other team member who is going to explain the market value analysis.
So the market value analysis was done in 2014, and I wasn't involved in it, so I'm not an expert in it, but it essentially was a study of all the residential properties throughout the entirety of the city. And they looked at a series of 9 factors that evaluated, essentially, if you break it down, the stability of the areas. So for instance, the median home values, I can't name them off, sort of drawing a blank, but there's 9 characteristics that they evaluated. Essentially, when you combine that, it gives you sort of an assessment of how stable that area is, and then they kind of logically put it in a gradient from A to G. And so there's a kind of your higher end markets, which they refer to as the A through C, which generally exhibit more stable characteristics, right? And so you can see in the central corridor there's some more stable areas in downtown. There are certainly areas in South City which are more stable, and in some areas even, for instance, along the Loop. And it's a sort of a guideline for investment. So the community development, well, going back, there's a set of middle markets which are showing some stable characteristics and some unstable characteristics, and then there's the lower end markets which essentially are showing very unstable characteristics. And it's really a guide or a tool that the planning department and the community development agency have been using for the last, I want to say, 4 years to sort of as a decision-making tool of what neighborhoods would benefit by more development or more planning. So it's a guideline. So we use it essentially in tax abatement even today. We'll look at if they're in areas that are lower in terms of, a G or an H, where this area really could use it more than, say, this area. And it doesn't work one-to-one, and it's honestly, it's something we haven't continually updated. In theory, you would update this every year, and you get a new snapshot of what it looks like now, and you make a decision, you update it. I mean, funds to pay for and to maintain and update that, you know, been a struggle, but hopefully that helps.
So I pulled out the little chart, and I know you can't see it from here, but you can see it's multicolored, right? And so this multicolored chart, I'm going to have it over here on the table so you can look at it up close before you leave. But essentially, this model, the market value analysis, essentially, if you look at this, you can see that in North St. Louis, pretty much it's all yellow. So it means that pretty much that is an area that requires more investment, or it has had lack of a lot of investment. And you can see in the central part, you can see where there are strong, the blue, you can see where there are some very strong pockets there. So you can't really see it from where you're sitting if you're in the back, or where you're seated if you're in the back, but you can take a closer look here, if you will, before you leave. And this is online, so if you go online to the city's website, you can find this document that will give you a better sense of what we're talking about here. But essentially, we're looking at particular areas that we will give more preference than others. Yes.
Otis?
Yes.
I got a question about that. My question is that for single-family detached housing, or if we start talking about multi-use with retail on the first floor, requiring structured parking?
It was really centered around home ownership and, I said home ownership, around residential. It really what was based on.
So you would not consider that for like industrial or office projects or?
Well, what we're doing is we would take into consideration, because generally what it does is gives you a sense of what else is happening in that neighborhood. And so while it's not the dominant factor, I mean, it's just a tool to get us into a discussion about whether we should.
And not that we're going to solve it tonight, but my point is if you say, you know, this is, I think, a lot of the work of our committee, you put something down like that, and the maximum length is 5 years and 75%, and it's, so if somebody comes in with a mixed-use project in
I think the
then
key.
all of a sudden, the idea is to provide some clarity and some level of guidance, and not that we need to decide it tonight, it's just that I think we need to.
So if you look at what I said there is that except for exceptional projects or low-income housing tax credit projects, and so that we can, I think what I'd be hopeful that some of you would give us some other exceptions that you think might be the case that we should look at. So that will be a great need for us. If there's something else that you think that we might have overlooked in this regard. So the last one is the implementation of the community benefits agreements on all catalytic projects. And so in this example, we're saying projects with development costs greater than $50 million would execute a CBA. Yes, sir.
If I go back to that MAC, would that be set in stone, or would, like, you know, there's sub-markets of markets? So, you know, Tower Grove, the Grove area. You know, you south of Manchester, that neighborhood's still kind of rough. North of Manchester, it's booming. So would that be set in stone, or would that be?
It is not set in stone, and what we need is probably better language that gives us some caveats to deal with projects based on individual needs. Okay. And use. Yes.
One of the things that I encourage people not to get stuck on is looking at an overall community, because within a community, you can have one block or 2 blocks that are totally detrimental to the entire neighborhood and its survival. And so you may only have, say, 2 houses that may need to be refurbished. So you want to make sure that takes care of the market value in the community. So and that's why I like individual basis, how we have the analysis done on these projects, instead of people just throwing blurbs out and say, Central West End doesn't need any incentives, because there's some really bad blocks in Central West End too. So we have to look at all of that.
Okay. All right. And so the last one, which is much talked about, one is the community benefits agreement, and I think that one is going to be decided by the Board of Alderman. So I'm going to we'll do whatever comes out of that mix. All right, so let me have the next slide. Okay, so go to the next one, please. So this is just a quick review again of what the next steps are.
You forgot number 11?
That I mentioned community benefits agreement. I said that was going to essentially be from whatever comes out of the Board of Alderman's discussion.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm.
But you know what, on that, number 11, may I just say something? It is very unfortunate that conversations are trying to create a cookie cutter process for community benefit agreements, which essentially negates what is the intention, which is the community, that immediate community makes decisions about what they need in a partnership with a developer. So if
Yeah,
what
I
comes
think that
from us should be so extremely basic, because all of those decisions should come from the community.
Okay. All right. So I would be here all night if we wanted to debate community benefits.
I think I'm going to go ahead and assert legislative authority over our hearing now.
Okay.
Kind of kick the executive branch out, if we can have the microphone back perhaps. We got to exert some authority here. Don, where's Donna at? Donna? Donna. We're supposed to have some sign-in sheets.
I think I saw some of them.
They look like they're right. Where is the sign-in?
I thought I saw some signing there earlier. Here they are.
Okay. Okay, the sign-in sheets are here, everybody wants to talk. What we can do now, why don't we go ahead and we'll give everybody who's brave enough to come up and give us an earful. We will go ahead and put you on TV. They're filming this tonight, so we'll ask you to come up here. We'll set up the sign-up sheets, we'll meet over here for just a second. We'll take a couple minutes break. So why don't we take a break now? If you'd like to make some comments, you can talk specifically about something that was brought up tonight, or if you want to have a big picture thing about where we should go or anything. It's a couple minutes. Feel free to sign up, say something. We got most of the committee here tonight. Obviously, you see this is very complex stuff we're dealing with. It's hard to get your arms around it. But we welcome you to say something tonight. We'll have Brian try to catalog all the comments that come in. We'll have them posted on the website. And then our committee, after we've had our second hearing, will kind of huddle amongst ourselves and probably have a hearing or two to try to flesh this out and take into consideration the things that we hear tonight and at our next meeting. So why don't we go ahead and begin signing up over here. Why don't, for this, Bill, why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
How many people we have signed up to? Only one.
Oh,
I'm sorry, two.
Okay, well, we'll give everybody a couple minutes. If somebody changes their mind, feel free to go over.
well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity and thank you for the hearing. I think it's been a good thing and there's obviously interest in the subject. I'll keep my remarks brief and I'll submit further written comments. Oh, certainly. My name is Bill Keeling. While I am a development attorney, I'm not here in that capacity tonight. I'm here as a city resident. I live in the Central West End, and I've lived in the city most of my life. I grew up in the city and went to grade school and high school in the city, so I'm here to stay. My comments will be brief. First of all, I just want to say that I really believe that the City Development Agency over the years has done actually a very good job in this area. And they have crafted a lot of, I think, well thought through projects that have really given the city a chance to move forward into the next decades. When you start looking at the projects that have occurred in this town and where would we be without them, you start thinking about these projects and where we'd be without them, this place would be a complete wreck. Things like the old post office, the downtown convention hotel, in Grand Center, Big Brothers Big Sisters, the Beaux Arts building, University Lofts, downtown, the Alderman building, Paul Brown Arcade, Terracotta Lofts, Printers Lofts, Windows on Washington, the Ventana, the Pet Building, the Syndicate Trust, the B Hat, the old post office, Lafayette Square, the City Hospital projects, the Loop Hotel, the Del Mar East. I mean, it goes on and on and on, and I really urge the committee members to look at the list of TIFs and look at those projects and think what this place would be like without them. Because I can assure you from my work, most of these would not have happened without the incentives. It wouldn't happen. I think we need to be aware that we're in a very difficult to develop region. We're one of the slowest growing regions in the country, and our city is the weak man of the region. And it is, while the base construction cost may be less to do here, we do have other things that we have put on development which make it more expensive. And I'm not saying those are bad, but MBE, WBE, workforce, some of the design review, which are all proper things and play a proper role, but they add cost. So I just really urge the committee to be very cautious and very thoughtful in what it's doing. They need to be thoughtful as to what is the state of the development community in this city. And I need to tell you that it is not a dense, highly populated community. As Mr. Williams indicated, they work very hard trying to attract developers in. I hate to say it, but you could hold you could hold a meeting in a very small room with those who do development on a general basis in the city. And that's a sad statement. And it's something that I think the committee should be concerned about also, and about that state. So anyway, I'll send my written remarks in. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Glenn Burley. I live in 20th Ward in the Marine Villa neighborhood. So I'm going to walk through my issues with Resolution 33 sort of point by point as it was done here. The first part, comprehensive review, that sounds like a great idea, but it's like a lot of advocates have been saying racial equity lens should be applied to this process like it is to everything else under what we're supposed to be doing with the city right now. So why racial equity analysis is not given as much of a say as architecture or urban design is very strange, and if we're going to be redoing the process, we need to get that in now. Number two, that sounds fine, none of the general funds. Hotel tax from TIF projects. So we have done a whole bunch of hotels recently, and if we were going to be responsible about doing more abatements and TIFs and stuff for hotels, we would wait to see how much this giant influx of rooms into our city's hotel room stock would do. So, I mean, if we really wanted to worry about the economics and our bottom line and stuff, we would take a break for a couple years until these things are completed and we see how those rooms impact our downtown economy. No new sales tax for Prop 1, that's fine. It's confusing as to why number 5 doesn't do number 4. So sales and earnings tax. So there's no real mention of how this will work and where this would go. And also, if the property is granted abatement, is percentage of value sent back to a general fund determined by the frozen value or by an actual market value assessment? You know, we have some TIFs that get both. Like the Foundry got TIF and tax abatement. So how are we calculating that amount returned? That is not covered in this in any way. Same thing with property taxes. There's just no idea of how we're determining this amount of money that's going in, depending on some of these different mechanisms that are used. The use of SIDs or TDDs more often. This one I think is pretty funny, actually, because we use them all the time. Almost every TIF we've done recently has come with at least one or more of these districts, and the cases where they don't is generally because they're already in one of these districts and can't be granted a new one. They actually made a big deal out of the one in Alderman Ogilvy's ward that they weren't using a SID, right? So I don't think it's impossible to encourage their use any more than they already are being encouraged. As we also know, these also increase our sales taxes, which is regressive for low-income residents, and puts our sales tax above 10% in many areas of town. So on the tax abatement side, once again, it sounds nice. This is a resolution, so nothing they've discussed tonight is actually legally enforceable in any way whatsoever. None of this will be a law. They can ignore this at will at any time. They do on a regular basis. We've seen TIF projects. Our current ceiling is 15% no matter where. Now they're adjusting it to 10 in higher value areas and up to 20 in lower value areas, which kind of sounds good if they actually followed it, but they don't follow the 15% rule. In 2015, the Ackerman Toyota got 29% via TIF and a SID on top of that. So when we say we're limiting things at 10%, we're not actually limiting the total subsidy because of the way they're being layered. And that is an important thing, that when we're saying that we're limiting, it actually says limit the subsidies via TIF, but that doesn't actually limit all the subsidies to a project, just that one layer. In the case of the Foundry, 14% of that is TIF. Over 50% of it is publicly subsidized, which means that more than twice the value of TIF is coming from other sources. And last but not least, abatements in better areas. In some areas, we just should not be abating single-family homes. We just shouldn't. We just got to be real about that. Now, if it's a multifamily home or a big building or something, there's an argument to be made for it if we're doing some affordable housing in there as part of the mix or something. But just abating single-family homes in the strongest markets in the city doesn't make any economic sense for us anymore, especially when we know it's increasing property taxes on low-income families. And finally, the CBA limit of 50. That is far above any of the current proposals, either Lewis Reed's, which would be $1 million in TIF value, or Megan's Green's bill, which would be $15 million total cost. It's way above that. It's just not a serious, not a serious suggestion compared to what the overall, conversation in the city is around this and in other towns. It's just not a serious proposal. Thank you.
Can I say something? First of all, I want to thank you. Public discourse, this is what it's all about. Will you be providing a written, this is written form? Also, will you be providing some kind of example or matrix for the racial equity piece that you spoke about on how that may be applied?
That's the kind of thing that's a good question that we need to get stakeholders together in the community and talk about how to do it. But we do know, looking at where these abatements and TIFs are used, we see African-American population plummeting in the neighborhoods in South City where these things are being used for the most. And that means that there's obviously disparate impact against African-Americans with the usage of these.
What would be helpful is if you come up with a matrix, go ahead and submit it to us so
Okay.
that we can, make that part of this process. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Next speaker? Is there another speaker?
No other speakers.
Is that it? Wow, okay. The Alderman from the 19th was asked to make a couple comments. Why don't we, no, I don't have the CR here. Why don't we just go down the table?
But Joe, I would say use the mic just because I think they're broadcasting this.
Okay.
And, it might be good if committee members went up there.
Would you guys,
So you can capture it.
want us to hand down the mic down here?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, well, we'll be a little informal since we're doing something.
No, I think it's the STL TV.
Test. Does that work? You okay? Okay, we'll be a little informal and we'll provide, you need to be over here.
I really wanted to comment on the terminology that is being recklessly used, racial equity. Understanding exactly what that means in its various forms is critical to the public because people have created an unnecessary frenzy without having facts that are true, showing exactly how not only the city of St. Louis applies it in everything that we do, but also federal mandates that require us to do the same. And so we are not going to give misinformation to people about how we are looking at our racial lens in this city. Our MVWB program, even though it has not always been at the highest percentage I would like for it to be, but it is improving every day. We have projects, most especially the larger projects that we've done in this city, that have amassed 30% and more. The women's percentage is higher now than it's ever been. So don't say that that is something that is never looked at and we do not apply it in the city of St. Louis, working with anything, whether it's a construction project or assessing the opportunity for new business owners, how we apply our housing, affordable housing, which is another thing that people are just throwing this out. There's no affordable housing. No one's paying any attention to it. This city has produced more affordable housing than anybody else around us in this region. And I know that's factual. You don't even know it's public housing because the mixed-use developments that are produced, not only do they have affordable units in it, but they have public housing units there, right next to the market rate units. That's how great they're being provided in this St. Louis City region. So we have a lot of information that needs to be factually applied and disseminated to the public so that they're not getting half-truths. And for me, that's critical because we spend a lot of time, I know I spend a lot of time and energy on making sure that things are fair and making sure that people have easy access to information and opportunities. And so we're doing it every day. And people are working together now better than they ever have. We need to also applaud those things and make sure that we continue as a city to have stronger partnerships that make it available for people to have a better quality of life instead of just talking and creating frenzy and creating situations where people are fighting against each other. It almost appears to me that we are trying to destroy our city rather than build our city. We have so many great things going on that we need to be talking about those. So you see, if you would like to not have any development take place for the next 2 to 5 years, as has been proposed in various documents that are floating around, that'll be okay. Because you know what would happen? Developers will take a hint from that and it would never come back to the city of St. Louis. And we will sit here dormant with nothing happening. When you look at Nashville, Nashville sat down, they came up with a plan from the state level to the local levels. They are leaps and bounds ahead of us in improving that area. And we can look all over the country and see the same thing happening. But we're so busy being divisive with unnecessary problems that have been created that we cannot move forward. So for me, I'm happy about the opportunity to really get a plan together. If anybody paid any attention, from day one when I came to the Board of Alderman, I said we need a plan. I said we need to have a financial economic development plan. We haven't fully funded our planning department. Those are things that are critical. So you know where you're going and you can continue to improve. But to just point fingers and throw out unsubstantiated facts is not healthy for anybody. And whether it's North St. Louis, South St. Louis, and then also you don't know your numbers because minority are increasing in South St. Louis by leaps and bounds. Neighborhoods are coming closer to 50%, and no matter what ward it is in the city, it's growing by leaps and bounds. So people have opportunities all over this city to live where they want to live and be a part of the community that they want to be a part of. But we have got to somehow, somewhere, get to a place where we're all working towards the same goal, which is improving our city. And that's the only thing we should be working on. Because it doesn't matter. I don't need to get credit. He doesn't need to get credit. We all just need to make sure that we have a better city.
I'll be very brief, guys. I'm Jack Coder. I'm the Alderman of the 7th Ward, which includes most of downtown St. Louis. I think, Joe, you probably said this before I got here, but Otis Williams is probably one of the hardest working guys in city government, and deserves a round of applause for being here tonight. Him and his team work very long hours. They're always available to the Board of Aldermen, to developers, to members of the community, to answer questions. I mean, they're really a wonderful asset. And, I think this is obviously a very healthy conversation, talking about incentives. I'm obviously cognizant of the fact that as we sit here today, we're going through a list of incentive reforms and everything else, and many of these projects that have happened in the past and projects that might happen in the future are in the 7th Ward. They're downtown projects. It's an area that still requires a lot of incentive to get deals done, to get things built. And that's something that is unfortunate, but it's still the case. And I would encourage folks who are here tonight who are very critical of incentives, which I certainly understand your argument, but I would encourage you all to also look at the region and look at incentives regionally, right? We're here having a public meeting about incentives. We obviously are taking this seriously. St. Louis Development Corp takes this seriously. The city takes this seriously. There are incentives used on a regular basis in municipalities, St. Louis County, that frankly, some of the stuff happens in the city pale in comparison to what happens in some of these areas that never even makes the newspaper, or St. Louis Public Radio, or the Business Journal. That's the Business Journal. I would just say, yes, these deals all deserve a lot of scrutiny. And frankly, I think they get a lot of scrutiny. They can always use more. But I would encourage folks who are serious about incentive reform to also look elsewhere in this region. And it is also a case for regionalism, right? We could, if we were working together with St. Louis County and working together with some of these municipalities as a region targeting development, we could be doing a lot more. And we're not, unfortunately, at this time. And I'd like to see that change. So as the Alderman of downtown who looks at an office market that is leasing at less than $15 a square foot, versus our competitor market, Clayton, down the street, which is leasing at upwards of $30 a square foot, where they're still giving huge incentives to build office buildings and new projects. This is something that's very concerning to me. So yes, I am all for some of these reforms and doing some of this to help make the incentive process more equitable, fairer. I also think we all need to be very cognizant, I'm very cognizant of, as a policymaker and the person who represents downtown St. Louis, that our biggest competitor is just across the city limit in Clayton. And I'm going to be fighting to keep every job downtown, to rehab every building downtown, to build a building on every vacant parcel downtown, and I'm going to continue to do that with little to no apologies as long as I'm in this job. And I will stop by saying, that again, I'll just say regionalism is part of the key to this. We really got to get that piece figured out. It'll make a huge difference in this conversation if we can fix our problems regionally. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Don't have any comments right now. So.
I'm Jeffrey Boyd, the Alderman for the 22nd Ward. I enjoy evening public meetings where there's an opportunity for the public to come out and voice their concerns. Public discourse is so important to me. We can't do better if we don't know better. But I want to echo some of the sentiment from my colleague from the 19th, Alderman Davis. There are a lot of competing interests throughout the city of St. Louis as it relates to how do we reshape our incentive program. There are different groups. How many people are here from Team TIP? Great. Because what's important to me is all these competing groups need to be in the same space at every meeting that's being held, whether it's a meeting by the HUDZ committee, whether it's a meeting with the group that Megan Green, I know she has a board bill, she'll be at that meeting. If Team TIP is having a meeting, let's be at that meeting. Because if we put all of our heads together, we can probably make some good sausage out of this situation. Because at the end of the day, it's about the greater good of the city of St. Louis. It cannot be about egos. It cannot be about, because I have a PhD, I know best of how to govern. Because governance is tough. It's very tough. And they're just tough decisions to make, like Alderman Kohler said in the 7th Ward. It is difficult when an organization or a company says, hey, I'm moving to Clayton. I'm taking my whole law office, and we're moving hundreds of jobs to Clayton because we can't take it no more in the city of St. Louis for whatever reason. And maybe they want to reinvest back into their property, and they need some incentives to stay. So that's the catch-22. It's easy to say, hey, look, they're downtown, they're making millions of dollars, goodbye. And so what goes with the goodbye is millions of dollars potentially. The sales tax revenue, because they go to eat downtown. The earnings tax revenue, the payroll tax revenue. So there's a lot of potential revenue that's lost. So we have to weigh a lot of that in our decision making as we look at incentive reform. And again, I hope it doesn't be so competitive that it's a win-lose. We have to create a win-win opportunity with everybody who has a vested interest in seeing the city of St. Louis being a great city, bar none. And again, thanks everybody for coming out.
Good evening. My name is Tom Oldenburg. I'm the 16th Ward Alderman. I also just want to say that I thank everybody for coming out tonight. I too enjoy evening meetings. I think it's an opportunity for us to share ideas and have some of that good discourse that Alderman Boyd was just talking about. What I will say, I have a 10-year career in community and economic development. I work for the 5th largest commercial bank in the country, so I have some particular perspective on this. And I will say, having done business around incentives and financing real estate and economic development projects throughout the country, St. Louis, we actually get this right a lot more than other cities do. And I think a lot of work has been done to date on how we finance projects with the use of tax incentives. And I think there's a lot of good work ahead of us. And this committee is going to do a very good job of deliberating on all the facts and the information. And again, it was mentioned that a resolution is getting introduced. And it's not law, that is correct, but it's a policy guideline. And I think as a banker who finances real estate and economic development projects, we like certainty in the risk that real estate developers and folks are taking. And where there are policies and guidelines that are adhered to, that often creates certainty for risk takers when they're doing certain projects. And that allows their projects to get financed. So that's a perspective that I think we have to continue to bring up to say the reality of situations are X, and here are the policies that we're going to follow and adhere to. So I again want to thank everyone for coming, and I will pass this to Alderman
Oglesby. Looks like Tom's got some Cheerios over here. I'll make a few points. I think to a certain extent, all incentives, especially local incentives, make everybody a little bit uncomfortable because most of the time the incentive goes to builders, developers who have more money than you or I tend to have, and so that makes us all a little uncomfortable, and it makes it important. It makes it important that we have clear rules and guidelines around what types of things should be incentivized and what types of things should not be incentivized. I think it's also important to take kind of the long view of this keep in mind the history of St. Louis, and that history is, of course, a city that lost population at a faster rate than any other city in the country for 40 years, and still has a declining population. And that makes for a very challenging investment environment, and it makes it hard for both the people we put in the developer category and the people we put in the regular people category like me. It makes it harder to justify spending or investing in any type of real estate. And it's important to have a functional real estate market. I think what is really good about this effort is it's a clear effort to get what the guidelines are out front, at the front end of the process, and it's based on data that we did not have a couple of years ago. So the market value analysis is valuable, and the PFM study, which has been referred to, but the PFM study was a careful look by an independent third party at how the city has utilized incentives for the last 15 years. It quantifies exactly how many incentives there have been, how much it costs, and it compares us to what other municipalities and other regions are doing. And one of the most important takeaways from that study for me is when you take a close look at that study, you can quantify what incentives are costing us in the annual budget of the city. And people frequently, I think, somewhat exaggerate what the impact of the overall budget is. So when you look at all of the tax abatements, the city's done, and there's a long list of tax abatements, but property tax abatements amount to lost revenue to the city of less than 1% of the city's budget a year, all of them. And when you include tax increment financing, it's an impact to the city's budget on an annual basis of about 2 to 3% maximum of the city's budget. So all of these incentives, which are important to get right and important not to get wrong, are only 3 to 4% of the city's budget. And without a doubt, many of them have retained jobs, created housing, remedied vacant buildings. There are really a lot of success stories that clearly would not have happened without these. And however, people have a low tolerance for the abuse of incentives. And when the people perceive that these are being used incorrectly, there is suspicion that they are all a scam, I think. And while I don't think they are all a scam, it's important for us to have the rules and controls in place to maintain a level of trust in the system so that the projects that get through the process are good projects, justifiable, not excessively subsidized, and the general public believes that these things are being done to the benefit of the city and not to the detriment of the city's budget and ability to deliver services. So I think we're a lot closer to getting it right with the data we have today than we were 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm a little optimistic on that note. So thank you.
As is customary, when we have non-members of the committee present, we provide them an opportunity to, do either of you care to make a comment?
Thank you.
Well, if that is it, we had all of the 2 speakers tonight. If you were a little shy, you want to come back and work up your nerve, we're going to go ahead and do this again all over on next Tuesday. And at that point, our vice chair from the 19th Ward will be hosting us at
Our meeting will be at the same time, 6:30 p.m. at the William Harrison Center. That is the extension of Forest Park Community College campus. It's directly across the street from Fisheye High School. So I'm looking forward to, if you think of some new things, new questions, or you just simply want to go through this process again. This is a lot of crazy. I mean, it takes a moment. And so if you just like to sit through it again, please feel free to come. And I'm going to have snacks.
bribe committee members' votes by providing food. And we have to be official. We got to go ahead and adjourn here.